Rome's legions conquered most of the known world running on bread, olive oil, and a drink most people today would spit out after one sip: sour, watered-down wine vinegar. The soldiers called it Posca, and it wasn't a punishment. It was standard issue, handed out to men, officers, and eventually emperors alike for centuries. To understand why, you have to start with the problem every ancient army faced long before Rome existed. Water kills. Not always through poison or enemy sabotage, but through what lived in it. Stagnant wells, contaminated rivers, and shared water sources spread dysentery through camps faster than any battle could thin the ranks. A general could win every engagement, and still lose half his force to bad water. Rome, more than any civilization before it, treated this as an engineering problem, and Posca was one of the simplest solutions anyone had found. The drink itself was almost insultingly basic. Take wine that had gone sour, or vinegar made specifically for the purpose, and cut it heavily with water. Sometimes herbs went in. Sometimes a bit of egg. The result was a thin, acidic, faintly wine-like liquid that tasted nothing like the sweet, resonated wines the Roman elite drank at dinner parties. It was the drink of the ranks, not the villa. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder documented Posca as a staple of military life, and later Roman sources describe it being issued as a matter of course to soldiers on campaign. This wasn't an occasional treat handed out on hot days. It was baked into the logistics of the Roman military machine, tracked and supplied the same way grain and oil were. Here's what makes Posca genuinely interesting from a modern standpoint. The Romans had no concept of germ theory. Nobody in the legions understood that bacteria caused dysentery, or that acidity could suppress bacterial growth on its own. And yet the drink they landed on, through centuries of trial, error, and practical experience, happens to work exactly the way a modern microbiologist would predict. Vinegar's acetic acid lowers pH to a point that many waterborne pathogens struggle to survive in. Diluting sour wine with water didn't just make bad water more palatable. In many cases, it made contaminated water safer to drink than the water alone. This is the part of the story that turns Posca from a historical curiosity into something closer to accidental science. Roman commanders weren't running controlled experiments. They were watching which units got sick and which didn't, which water sources caused trouble on long marches, and which drinks kept men upright through a campaign season. Over generations, that observational process converged on a practice that modern chemistry can now explain in detail, even though the Romans themselves explained it in completely different terms. They talked about balance, about the body's humors, about drinks that were cooling, or drying. The underlying microbiology was invisible to them. The result wasn't. Posca wasn't only about survival, either. It had a practical logistical advantage that made it attractive independent of any health benefit. Wine and vinegar preserve far longer than plain water, especially in the kind of containers and conditions a marching army had access to. A barrel of wine gone sour wasn't a wasted resource to be thrown out. It was raw material for Posca. Nothing in the Roman supply chain went to waste if it could be repurposed, and turning spoiled wine into a daily ration was exactly the kind of efficient thinking that let Roman armies operate at a scale most ancient states couldn't sustain. There's also a social dimension to Posca that's easy to miss if you only think of it as a health drink. Wine in Rome was heavily stratified by class and quality. The finest vintages, the ones aged and blended with honey or spices, belonged to senators and the wealthy. Ordinary citizens drank cheaper, rougher wine. Soldiers on campaign got Posca, the least refined tier of all. Drinking Posca was, in a sense, a marker of rank and hardship. An officer who drank Posca alongside his men, rather than reserving better wine for himself, was making a visible statement about shared sacrifice. That's exactly why the historical record includes accounts of emperors drinking Posca deliberately, even when they had every luxury available to them. The Emperor Hadrian, known for his hands-on style of leadership and his habit of marching alongside his troops rather than commanding from a distance, was recorded as sharing the same rations as ordinary soldiers, Posca included. This wasn't about taste. It was about signaling. A leader who ate the same bread and drank the same sour wine water as the men under his command was making a claim about legitimacy, about being a soldier's soldier rather than a distant aristocrat directing war from comfort. This detail also explains one of the more famous, and more debated, appearances of Posca outside a strictly military context. The Gospel accounts of the crucifixion describe Roman soldiers offering a sour wine drink on a sponge to the man being executed. Many historians and biblical scholars have connected this to Posca specifically, since it was the standard drink issued to Roman soldiers on duty, the kind of thing a guard would have on hand as a matter of routine rather than as a special gesture. Whether it was offered as a small mercy, a practical necessity for the soldiers themselves, or simple availability, the detail lines up with what we know about Posca being carried by soldiers wherever they were stationed, crucifixion detail included. The drink's reach went beyond the battlefield too. Posca shows up in civilian contexts as an affordable, everyday beverage for people who couldn't access or afford proper wine. Vendors sold it in Roman streets and marketplaces as a cheap alternative for laborers and the poor. In a world without refrigeration, without water treatment, and without any reliable way to know if a given well or cistern was safe, having an inexpensive drink that happened to be safer than plain water was valuable well beyond the army. It's worth pausing on just how long this practice lasted. Posca isn't a footnote from one particular century of Roman history. References to it span from the mid-Republic through the height of the Empire, a run of use lasting hundreds of years. Practices that survive that long in a large, complex, and highly organized society tend to survive because they work, not because of superstition or tradition for its own sake. Rome was a civilization obsessed with engineering, logistics, and results. An army that couldn't keep its soldiers healthy on the march couldn't project power across 3 continents. Posca, however humble it looked in a soldier's cup, was part of the infrastructure that made that projection of power possible. There's a broader lesson buried in this story about how ancient peoples solved problems without the scientific frameworks we take for granted today. The Romans didn't need to know what a bacterium was to figure out, through generations of practical experience, that certain drinks kept armies healthier than others. This kind of empirical trial and error, refined slowly over time and passed down through military tradition, produced solutions that in some cases anticipated modern science by close to 2,000 years. It's a reminder that a society's assumptions about the world don't have to be correct for its solutions to work. The Romans were wrong about why Posca helped. They were right that it did. Modern attempts to recreate Posca have leaned into this history rather than away from it. Historical reenactors, food historians, and some ancient history enthusiasts have brewed versions of the drink using wine vinegar, water, and occasionally herbs, following descriptions preserved in Roman sources. The consensus among people who've actually tried it is that it's an acquired taste at best, sharp, sour, and nothing like the sweetened, chilled beverages people associate with refreshment today. But that's rather the point. Posca was never designed to be enjoyed. It was designed to keep an army alive and marching, and on that measure, it did its job for centuries. Rome wasn't even the first civilization to reach for vinegar as a practical tool rather than just a flavor. The Greek physician Hippocrates, writing centuries before Posca became standard military issue, recommended vinegar for treating wounds and various ailments, working from the same kind of observational medicine that shaped so much of ancient healing. Egyptian and Babylonian sources reference vinegar's use in food preservation going back further still. What Rome did differently wasn't discovering vinegar's usefulness. It was scaling that usefulness up to the level of an entire military supply chain, turning a household remedy into standard issue equipment for an army that numbered in the hundreds of thousands across its provinces.